Emotional damage.
Hi, I'm Andy,
And I'm Roger,
and welcome to The Middle,
where we try to have thoughtful conversations
about awkward topics.
on our search to find the middle.
We're going to give you last week's news today.
It's a slogan we should put on the t-shirt.
Stop touching her.
I am tonight announcing my candidacy.
Taylor Swift.
Look, my biggest issue with marriage is that I think that it's a fundamentally flawed institution that is built on the oppression of women.
I will not be lectured about sexism and misogyny.
Having truly rational conversations about controversial issues is risky these days.
Roger.
Andy, how you doing?
Oh, pretty good. I got a fun fact for you.
Yeah, hit me.
So, what year were you born?
85?
Okay, so we were both born in 85. So did you know 1985 is as close to the end of World War II, so 1945, as it is to now? Almost.
That blows my mind, right? Because, yeah, it's just like, you have no relationship towards that.
Yeah, I saw that today. I just thought, gosh, like, we're that old. We're big 4-0 coming.
I don't know. How do you feel?
I'm just going to, cling on to that forever statement. Oh, 40's the new 30, right? It's a new chapter.
If you were to ask me how I felt maybe pre-pandemic, I wasn't actually feeling my age that much. But I think since the pandemic, and not saying it was COVID, I'm just saying that the time that has elapsed since then, I've definitely fallen off that cliff.
There's been more children along the way too, right?
Oh, I mean, they are definitely aging me really, really badly. Sometimes I wake up after a hard night or whatever, and I look in the mirror and I catch glimpses of myself, or going up the lift, they have those horrendous downlights, and I catch a glimpse of myself and the bags under my eyes, and it's like the picture of Dorian Gray. I look like I am slowly dying. Like I'm dying just a little bit every day. In my face, I can feel it. And but yeah, just the last couple of years, last year really, I feel like I've aged a lot, and my skin, my hairline, everything, I just feel it, right? Because I was under the impression that we're the generation where we'll continue to look good, look quite young into our 40s, but I think time comes for us all, unfortunately.
So my back just randomly cracks. I just hear this big crack. Almost like how your knuckles crack, and I'm just like, I've never had that before. So I'm just thinking.
Do you groan when you sit up now?
A little bit. I'm just definitely getting up, and you're getting old when the way you sit up now is you use the momentum of your legs to lift your body. The cracking of the back, it kind of gets me because it's just this shudder of it's almost like when the tectonic plates during an earthquake, they just shift into a different position. That's how it feels, and it surprisingly it just happens, and then there's no. That's it. It's okay. There's no pain or anything associated with it. But I wonder, am I just one movement away from absolute chaos in my back, slip discs and having back surgery or whatever.
A strong fart will ruin you. Just throw a disc out from a strong fart. Yeah. I think it's lots of things too. It's have you ever caught a glimpse of your dad's ear hair? I remember as a child, looking at his ear hair and being mesmerized. I'm like, oh my God.
It's the nose hair as well.
The nose hair too, yeah. But the ear hair, the ear has no business being that hairy. Why would you need hair there when you get old, as you get older, right? If anything, you need less hair because your hearing goes down. And I just remember looking at it and going, wow, that is a forest in there. When did that start and why is it happening, right? And men of that generation, they just think, fuck, they don't trim it or anything, right? That would be feminine, right?
Do you think there's going to be a business model to transplant nose and ear hair to the bald patch?
No, I think the Turks have the hair transplant down pat. Maybe we should do a live 100th anniversary middle episode from Turkey where we both get hair transplants. But no, I think that where I was going with that was that in my right ear, I've just started to grow ear hair, but just my right ear. It's really weird. I've got maybe 3 or 4 hairs in my right ear. And
I always
it'll
knew
just
you
grow.
were a little bit right wing.
It's so weird, and it's like you just feel, it just goes full circle, right? Like I've got a very good memory, and I remember watching movies with my dad when I was young, right? Like maybe young teens, right? And he'd do this thing where halfway through the movie, or maybe even more than halfway sometimes, he'd be like, "Oh, I remember I've seen this movie." What the fuck? Like, how could... Or it even used to amaze me when I was younger, where you hear your dad tell a story that he doesn't realize he's told before. And I would just be in disbelief. Like, how is it possible to actually forget that you've told someone a story, or forget that you've watched a movie in a way that you've literally watched more than half the movie before you realize you've seen this before? And so I was so like, how does that happen? And then it starts happening to you. And you're like, I remember the first time it happened where I was telling someone a story and they're like, yeah, you told me this. I'm like, oh, really? I told you. And it just like blew my mind. And it just gave me this very, very small taste, kissing the shores of what it would be like to start to lose your memory. And it's not a good feeling.
But do you think it is actually lost memory? Like, I can't imagine. Like, I'm just thinking about my own exposure to... let's just say older gentlemen in my life, right? Without naming any names. There's like a handful of stories that just get told on repeat, like almost every single time you meet, right? And I just can't believe that they're not aware that they like.
That's what I'm talking about.
But I can't believe that they think that this is the first time they're telling this story. Like it's almost like they don't give a fuck. They just love telling the story, right?
Okay, that's slightly different. So I do have an uncle that literally told the same story like literally 100 times, and he would do it as like almost his dinner party trick. It would come that time at night after dinner and between coffees or whatever, and he'd tell the story. It would get some laughs and some different things, and that just became his bit. So I don't believe that he thought it was an original story, but there's definitely times where someone is genuinely telling you some information that they find really interesting, but you've heard it before. And they've just forgotten. They've told you.
Well, speaking of Roger's uncle, do you like that for a segue? So today we're going to talk about Uncle Roger. Maybe for those whose ears haven't been twigged by that reference, do you want to give a short overview of Uncle Roger?
Well, Uncle Roger started appearing kind of, I suppose, in YouTube and internet shorts a couple of years ago. And basically, he's this Asian character, Chinese-Malaysian character to be exact, in a bright orange shirt. And he essentially he puts on a thick kind of Asian English accent in a humorous way. And he's very kind of satirical, he's biting, and he reviews essentially white people trying to cook fried rice or other Asian dishes. And he just savages them in a way of like this... impatient, kind of sarcastic Asian attitude, right? And it's mesmerizing to listen to because of the accent. Like, it's everything. It's like the accent. He's being so catty and so petty. He's just dressing down people who are trying to be quite serious. Like, they're taking these cooks are trying to take themselves quite seriously in their cooking videos, and he's just giving them shit, right? And he's become a bit of a sensation. And from there, he's launched, a series of reviewing famous chefs. He's got a stand-up routine. He's like this proper character now, proper comedy circuit character. So, yeah, it's burst onto the scene as Uncle Roger.
All right, well, I think for our listeners, we better play a few clips from our friend Uncle Roger.
Hello, niece and nephew. It's Uncle Roger. It's Jamie Oliver making egg fried rice.
Egg fried rice. It's an absolute classic.
Where your wok, Jamie? Where your wok? 25 cookbook, but you can't afford one wok.
Yes, you could do this as a side dish.
When my mom make me egg fried rice, that is the main dish. I never tell my mom, oh, mom, this egg fried rice is only side dish. Where the main dish? Where the main dish? I would have been beaten to death.
I'm going to go in with 1 tablespoon of olive oil.
Who use olive oil for egg fried rice? Why are you making salad? Olive oil is like white people oil.
You can hear it sizzling.
You hear sizzling, I hear my ancestors crying.
We're just going to toss it around. Right, the next.
Oh, Uncle Roger don't like the look of this. He taking ingredient from this drawer, and this drawer looks so white because Asian ingredient never come in jar. You ever notice that? Asian ingredient always come in plastic bag or bad packaging. If your packaging look this nice jar, nice bag over there, then it's not Asian ingredient.
Next ingredient. I have this in my home all the time now, chili jam. It's
What I tell you, it's not Asian ingredient. What he doing with chili jam? Let's see.
brilliant for cooking. It's got heat, but it's also got the sweetness, and it's going to kind of glaze.
Oh, no.
You know, he draws your attention in most predominantly because of this accent that he lays on, right? And it's very much a it's like a Cantonese style accent that he like layers up. It's not his real accent, of course, but it's so striking, and he uses it to comedic effect. But I think beneath that, like, that sustains you for like maybe one video, right? It's like the emotional damage, like meme or whatever, like that can
strong Southeast Asian accent. Let's call it like Singapore kind of Malaysian accent.
Yeah, but that whole thing can kind of get you so far, but like you can't build a whole like YouTube universe around just like doing a thick accent, right? Because it's not really like the joke wears very thin quite quickly, right? But the true art in what he does, apart from the accent, is he's really cutting, but he's actually very perceptive as well. So he genuinely picks up. Now, you mentioned he does like Asian cuisine, but he's branched out since. And there's this really good video of him reviewing Gordon Ramsay's grilled cheese sandwich, right? And he just there's so many moments in it where he just like he points out that like, oh, like I'm not going to do the accent because it's like, well, I'll butcher it, but you know, I don't want to offend people.
I want to hear you try.
No. Actually, I must admit, I did do it with my son because he watches. He watches. It's like sometimes it comes on his shorts, and then I realize every time I sound like I veer off into this Indian accent, so I'm definitely not going to do it.
So, which one are you most comfortable with, the Haya or the Fuya?
Fuyo.
See, that's like Hokkien though, right? That's Hokkien.
Well, it's definitely a I'm not going to do it, but anyway, he's got Gordon Ramsay, and Gordon Ramsay's making this grilled cheese sandwich. But like maybe what like because I've been like down the rabbit warren of like watching a lot of his videos. Like the thing that sustains me is that he picks up in like the Gordon Ramsay video that like, oh, Gordon, don't lie, you know you fucked up. Like you fucked up this thing, like because with this grilled cheese sandwich, like I suppose like not to get into the cooking side of it, but you know, basically if you're going to do a grilled cheese sandwich on a pan, the pan can't be that hot, otherwise the bread burns and the cheese doesn't melt. So it needs to be a lower heat so that it all sort of heats more evenly, kind of more gradually. And like Gordon Ramsay puts this whole pan like basically on like a fireplace to be rustic, you know, to get some romantic vibe to it, and he totally burns the bread. And then he's like, oh, you know, and then Gordon Ramsay shows his grilled cheese sandwich to the camera, and then, you know, Uncle Roger says, oh, your cheese isn't even melted. It's just like blocks of cheese. This isn't like a Minecraft cheese sandwich. Like this is, and then, you know, Gordon Ramsay, like he's looking, oh yeah, the cheese is all melted. Oh, this is just like, no, it hasn't. Like you've just showed us like a still of it. It's pretty funny, but he picks out like those little details that, you know, when you're just watching those videos, like those cooking videos, those cooking channel, like food channel style videos or whatever, it's like you kind of watch them fairly passively and you're not really paying attention to those kind of details that he picks up on them. And he does, I mean, he butchers Jamie Oliver more than anyone else, but it's really perceptive, and and he's funny too. He's genuinely funny. Like
he's witty as well, right? Like he definitely, he's got the gift, that the comedian's gift, where they can pick out something very specific and twist the knife.
And I guess on YouTube, there's so much like fodder, like for him to play with, right? You got to put yourself out there a little bit to have a cooking YouTube channel, right? So you got to portray some sort of degree of expertise or whatever. But often, you know, these are people who don't have it, and he sort of cuts through that veneer of them portraying themselves as this like expert. Yeah,
I think the good thing too, right? How it originally started was that it's that kind of white supremacy view of the world, right? Like that somehow those that are privileged make these cooking shows, right? And they have the nerve to think that in all their fanciness and all their kind of extravagance that they can do Asian dishes, right? And what was so charming about the original series of like fried rice reviews was that it was just kind of stripping it, taking them down the ladder. It's like all this stuff that you're doing is all wrong. Like this is like the true, authentic fried rice is meant to be simple, right? And it's meant to be cheap. It's, you know, it's meant to be very like a simple and cheap dish. And all these things you're doing are just like misguided because that's it sometimes. Like, you know, it's, I think that's what I loved about it too, because it was kind of really taking all these pretentious white chefs down a bit of a thing. Is like, whatever you do, it still won't be authentic. It still won't be good, right? Like you're still screwing it up. In the same way that I suppose, you know, like if you make pasta wrong, an Italian will have like a very violent reaction, right? Or like the most famous one would be, say, like putting pineapple on a pizza, right? If a true kind of Southern Italian person sees that, they'll have a pretty angry reaction to it, right? Like they'll feel very strongly.
They have reactions if you use the wrong kind of canned tomatoes.
Yeah, or the shape of the pasta, right? It's like I can't understand that. They're like the shape is so important to them, even though the ingredients are the same. But it's the same kind of thing. Like Asian culture doesn't really have that as much. So I loved it when he put it in, right? And I think that the other thing I really liked about it as an Asian person is that you kind of, and it's similar to Ronnie Cheng as a comedian, you kind of have this model minority view, especially in America, of Southeast Asians, that they're quite submissive or polite or, you know, they don't ruffle feathers. And I love this new generation that just actually are quite aggressive and quite biting and like they don't take any shit, right? And I quite like that too. Now, the balancing act to that is probably, it's like, are accents fair game? Is it okay for non-Asians to be putting on the Asian accent, right? Which you've admitted to just doing with your son.
Well, technically I didn't achieve it. I just went for the Indian accent instead.
Indians, Asians too. Subcontinent, baby. But it's true, like, you know, we've talked about that. So the whole emotional damage thing, like how many people, like I hear kids say that all the time now and like, you know, and stuff like that. Or when is it okay and when is it not? Like it's getting into a little bit of dicey territory, even for Nigel, right? Like the actual creator, putting on that thick accent, you know, you might be setting back the cause a little bit. Some people may feel that.
So I want to pick up on a few. I mean, there's a few things in there that you've said that I think we should unpack a bit more. I think we should come back to the white food culture piece. Let's unpack the accent first, right? Because like the accent is kind of his brand, but I kind of feel like he could still have a successful YouTube channel if he just spoke in his natural voice and said, like, just basically made the same observations. Like, I think the quality of it's there, but he's playing a character, right? So
I don't know if everyone got that though. Like at the beginning, I don't think people thought he was a character. They just thought, this is like a funny sounding Asian guy, right? Who's kind of rude and funny.
I'm not sure. I look, to be honest, I'm pretty late to the bandwagon, so I'm not sure what, 2-3 years ago when he first came onto the scene, or however long ago, what the reaction was. But I mean, just my own sort of experience, like, and this was my own feeling, like knowing that this whole, like, there's a whole YouTube ecosystem of like basically guys of his age that are of Asian heritage playing up to be very, maybe less their English is as a second language, playing up that
English
thing,
kind of thing.
Yeah. So there's a whole ecosystem of people. So I twigged onto that he was in that spectrum very quickly, but I can totally imagine that when he first came on the scene, that wasn't necessarily the case. But look, first things first, like he, as I understand his biography, is he spent most of his life in Malaysia, so he's definitely of the region. It's not like he's not like a white guy taking the piss out of the Asian, like an Asian sort of accent, right? But it still does beg the question, like, is it fair game? Because we've been trained as a society, right, that this is like a taboo, like this is something like, don't go there, don't do that. And I'm not sure it's strictly the case that, like, if the taboo exists, I'm not sure it's like strictly black and white that because he's of Asian heritage that suddenly there's no, like, it's all good, especially when the idea is to exploit it for comedic purposes to people like me, right? To Americans, to people from the UK, to Canadians, to Australians. You know what I mean? Like, it's the audience is he's touching a nerve for people who will find it funny for not necessarily always the best reasons.
Yeah, it's tricky. Look, I think that it does enable some of that behavior. I mean, in the same way that you would be reluctant to try to impersonate the accent live on air now, right? You kind of know that it's a bit of a sensitive subject, right? And I go back to, our episode around comedy. If it's funny, all is forgiven, and it's funny, right? And people are enjoying it, and he's making a living out of doing this. Now, where it becomes problematic is that, I suppose, when you have, when you have people putting on the accent outside of the culture and not being sensitive about it, right? Like, and even then, I don't know exactly how I feel about that. Put it this way. Okay, let's do a bit of an experiment here. If you, and I think a lot of people, who's that surfing star, that female surfing star in Australia that's really famous?
Lane Beachley?
Yeah. She got in trouble for this, right? She got in trouble for this kind of view, but let me do the thought experiment between us now that some time has passed. So basically, the idea is that if you're amongst friends, no matter what nationality you are, is it okay to make racist jokes? If you as a group, all of you individuals as a group, who are being racist together and having a laugh, are not expressing that in society because you know that it may be taken offensively in some cultures. Like, is that okay?
All right. So I think it probably depends on, like, I'm going to add some extra layers of complexity to the thought experiment to get at where I think there's some lines. So I think if something is funny because let's say it's like a pun, or let's say it leverages some other aspect of humor unrelated to race, but it happens to venture into an area where, maybe a culture or people of a culture would find it offensive, then, the reason it's funny to that group is not because it's belittling or putting down a particular group or being, discriminatory to a particular group, but rather because of some other factor related to it, then I think that's okay. And I think you could probably say the need to be, like, super sensitive in case someone will be offended is maybe more limited. Like a lot of comedy, right? Like if you take the best stand-up comedian, right, and go through their jokes, right, any stand-up comedian for that matter, and you relayed that in a workplace setting, there would be very few stand-up comedians that wouldn't say a single joke that may not offend one group in a corporate setting, right? Such that it's probably not appropriate to air it in that setting, right? So then when you go to a more narrow, more comfortable grouping of people, you might be able to achieve that, right? But I think where it would be problematic is if that group, and this is where I'll say, yes, it would be a problem, is if that group finds it funny because of, like, they're putting down a group, or they're... And so if that group finds that funny, then that's a reflection of that group, right? It's just like there's a bit of progress that's yet to occur.
Is that... So where you're heading, I guess, in the experiment is that it's more about where the laughter comes from. And if the laughter comes from the degradation of that cultural group, it's not okay. Yes.
If it comes from a position of, like... I mean, like to give an example, it's like the classic joke of how many Irishmen does it take to change a light bulb kind of thing, right? The Irishman to hold the light bulb and 40 Irishmen to turn the room, right? It's clearly a derogatory joke, and you could put whatever group you put, whatever. Like, let's say you have that joke, but you apply it to another nationality, or let's say it's a completely different joke, but it's of that kind of nature. Then, like, it's essentially like continuing a stereotype or some sort of prejudice or whatever. In which case, like, I'd say if that was like, I don't think anyone finds that joke funny Like maybe once upon a time they found it funny because they like to rib on Irish people. But I think that the funniness of that joke now, and it probably wouldn't land quite the same as maybe it did in previous years or times. But that joke is funny if it's funny, because it's like kind of clever. It's like saying, oh well, this is how a stupid person would change it. Like if you said, how does a stupid person change a light bulb, right? Like but the fact is that you're subbing Irishman for stupid person, and that's where it becomes problematic, right? But at the end of the day, if it's funny because the setup's funny and that's what people are actually laughing at, then you might have some accountability on the person. Well, could you just like tell it in a more like above the line kind of way, because it's still going to be funny with or without that reference, in it. Then you'd maybe that's what you should expect of that group. But at the same time, like, I think a lot of humour is quite complex. It's like people laugh for a whole variety of reasons. They might even just be laughing because everyone else is laughing, right? Like it can be this contagious element to it. So, yeah, I don't think there's a simple yes and no sort of answer. But I think inherent in your questioning, like when you set it up as a racist joke, right, you're kind of answering it in its own right, aren't you? Like you're kind of saying, well, if it's by definition, it's a tautology that if it's a racist joke, then it's going to be more in that latter category that I said, where they're putting down a group of people. So, yeah. But it's just that the definition of a racist joke now, like, could be fairly broadly conceived.
I kind of come at this from a slightly different angle. I actually think that maybe I've just watched too much racial comedy, like Fat Pizza and all these kind of things growing up. And being a minority myself, I feel obviously protected from the racism charge. But I just think that sometimes, like, what turns you on, you don't really choose what you find funny sometimes. Like you said, it's a complex cocktail of, like, what makes you laugh, what gets you laughter. And I do kind of think the most important thing when it comes to this stuff is not that you find something funny or not and you suppress it. It's more that you understand its impact on people and you manage that. So, like, I'm kind of okay with it. Like, if you're in a group of people and you can have a guarantee that no one in that group is getting offended, now that might be the tricky part. Maybe you can't guarantee that, right? But if you could, I'm okay with it, right? Like, as long as these are people that do not wish to, make those jokes and discriminate against people outside that trusted circle where other people hear and stuff like that, I kind of with Lane Beachley on this one. I kind of feel that is okay. She's just being honest. Like, it's okay to joke around with, say, people that aren't offended, because comedy is offensive, right? Like, and that's okay. Like, I think that, yeah, I just kind of feel like, it's a do no harm principle, right? Like, I don't think that if you are laughing at the degradation of different people, like, you could just find it funny, but you don't believe that all Irishmen actually are stupid. I don't think that really kind of like holds, right? Yeah, and I don't think joking about it encourages more and more of that behavior that then gets normalized.
I don't think it's so much, the issue isn't so much that people should have some sort of like artificial set of like rules about what they should be permitted to say and not say, in like if they're with mates and they're having a laugh or whatever. And don't say that, like this is just, it's wrong that they said this thing. But I think where I probably would I kind of agree with part of what you said, but then the bit where I disagree is that it is possible to like look at a group of people and say, well, you laughed at that, you found that funny. I kind of think it's a little bit, like, I'm not sold that like in this day and age, if you laugh at that and you find that funny, that's probably a reflection on you. You're like, maybe your lack of, like, maybe you're not exposed to the real world enough. Like, and I think you certainly yourself coming at it from, okay, let's give it a completely different example, right? A work site, right? Let's say you have a building site, and there's a bunch of tradies joking about like making really derogatory jokes about women, right? Yeah. And they laugh, they find it funny, and they're happy to like go one up. But if we were in that sort of setting, we'd be like quite uncomfortable, right? And I can't, like, I definitely think we would walk away from that conversation like with a bit of like judgment against those people, right? We'd be judgy, right? And I think that's the kind of thing. Like, a lot of the people who call out humour and say, "Oh, that's racist. That's a racist joke," they're people who are being judgy against, like, people they perceive as, like, you know, less educated or less, you know, woke. You know, woke's actually the part of the term here. That's how it originated, like, this idea of be more woke, be more alert to these kind of racial issues, right? So in their minds, it's like, oh, these people are less woke than me, right? Because they find that fun.
But isn't it a ladder, though, right? Like on that construction site example, and I did clarify by saying the problem might be within a group, you may not know who's offended or not. So it's probably the hard bit to manage. But say that they were all stereotypical, you know, construction site culture guys, and they were, you know, they were making some jokes about sexist jokes, let's say. Isn't the problem in terms of like the hierarchy here that spills over into catcalling and other things like that? Isn't that the main issue here? Not the fact that they're talking smack, which is part of their, you know, culturally what they find funny.
I think, no, I don't think it's just that, like, if you can bottle it up and contain it and keep it isolated, that it's fine. Like, I think there would be a view that, like, that represents some sort of disrespect for women, for example. Like, that is fundamentally disrespectful, and in the context of like racial jokes or whatever, I think the suggestion would be that no, there's just something fundamentally disrespectful or dehumanizing about it, such that it doesn't matter if you contain it. Like, this is just not something that, yeah, people want to moralize that stuff, right? They want to say, no, that's not. We shouldn't kind of just say it's okay, you know, like, even though it might be contained to not harm anyone. Like, there's something fundamentally wrong about it, or maybe it's even saying that, yeah, but the person who laughs at that is also the person that goes home and, like, abuses their wife, or who, you know, all that sort of stuff.
I mean, that's a long bow to draw.
Oh, well, I just mean this is the kind of, like, it's like the aspiration of being, like, aspiring to be, like, the best possible human being you can, right? Like, you probably won't find, you know, like, we haven't talked much about religion since our very, very first episode, but, like, you might find people who are, let's say, you know, really sincerely hold, like, a deep sort of religious faith or whatever. They're aspiring to be the best possible person they can. And this is, like, not within that framework and tradition, right? So it's all about trying to be better.
Let me ask you this, Andy. Would you feel differently about Obama if you knew that in private he uses the N-word?
Well, I'm sure he sings along to a lot of those rap songs that use the N-word, so... But, okay, can I ask you a question then about the accent side of it, right? So you said you were a little bit unsure about it, right? So let's say, just on that notion of the use of accents, right? Do you think it's, let's say a white person, someone who's not of Asian heritage, starts...
Yeah, so you can't use yourself as an example because you don't identify as white.
Well, I'm a shade of grey at the moment, so... But, like, I guess, like, is this... Or maybe to draw it out, like, is there any difference between a white person laying on the accent and an Asian person laying on the accent? Like, is there any difference?
Yeah.
Like, what's the difference? And then why does that matter?
I mean, of course there's a difference, right? Because the closer you are aligned to the culture, the more you can step into the cultural stereotypes without violating these social agreements, right, or moral agreements. And that's just the way it's always been, right? And you can see that, like I just used with Obama, like, it might be unsavory to think that in private Obama kind of drops the N-bomb, but he's allowed to. You know, he's part of that culture. He can do that if he chooses to, without
All right, so
judgment.
I want to extend the thought experiment. Does it change, or how does this question change if it's like, let's say, a Japanese person making fun of, like, a Cantonese accent? So, like, they're both of Asian, like the continent of Asia.
Yeah. Oh,
like,
that's just yeah. That's yellow on yellow crime, baby. That's all legit. Like, that's fine, right? Like,
it's all fine.
It's all fine. Like, in the same way, I actually think that there's even a little bit of bleed from like Chinese people to Indian people.
All right. So then next dimension, right?
It's really just white people in the rest of the world.
Okay.
It's like
all right.
Apple and the rest of the world.
Okay, so the next thing, what if you have a white person who does the accent because they're paying homage or respect to like either the emotional damage or the Uncle Roger or whatever, and they're paying homage to the lines, right? So they're trying to imitate the lines, and it's like it's actually a sign of respect for him as a comedian. It's certainly there's no ill intent.
Yeah, it's fine. It's fine. Look, where it gets complicated, right? So like undoubtedly, I've no doubt in my mind, people are fascinated with accents because there's something about them, right? Like this idea of where do you come from? Like evolutionary wise, like hearing an accent and being able to place it. That's why Europeans are so obsessed with them, right? Like, or if you ever have two Poms, they get into a meeting at work, they spend the first 10 minutes trying to work out where the other's from, like from the Midlands and stuff, right? Because they have such distinctive and proud accents. There's nothing wrong with being fascinated and finding accents entertaining. All the best comedians do it from a storytelling point of view to keep your attention. And if it's funny and it's used in like, good faith, that's fine. Now, there needs to be sensitivity about these things, right? And that's where I go back to that point around like, it's the offense, right? If you can regulate yourself because you understand the impact to someone else, that's all I kind of expect. As a minority, that's my standard, right? Like, I don't think for the average Asian person that it's that bad, right? Like there are levels to it. Like I said, the Matt Rife using a tone to describe a black character, that's acceptable, right? Him dropping the N-bomb, not acceptable. Someone maybe pretending to talk about like, a Vietnamese nail salon, and they're like, you got boyfriend, honey? You got love you long time? Like that's okay, right? That's kind of okay. Like no Asian person's going to hear that and just like, oh, I've got to cancel this person. But calling an Asian person a chink, oh yeah, that's gonna do it, right? So there are different things, like you said, it goes to the intent, it goes to like some of the history behind this stuff, and yeah.
So with all right, so you've put a test, like a litmus test, which I think is a good one, which is like if you're thoughtful enough to know or to be able to kind of read and understand, like, is the way you're about to use this accent going to be offensive, right? So if you're attuned to that and you're aware of that and you got a good read on that and you use it in a way that doesn't cause offense, then it doesn't matter who you are, it's okay. But then to loop back to one of your earlier comments around, well, let's say if an Asian does the accent, how does that compare to a white person doing it? I think there's like a feedback loop partially there too, in that an Asian laying on a thick Asian accent can get away with more than what a white person can, because it's clear that the Asian saying, like someone of Asian heritage laying on a really thick, even dare I say offensive Asian accent, they're doing it in good faith. It's clear they're doing it in good faith because they're not taking the piss out of themselves, right? Like of their heritage. They're less likely to be than if it's like, say, a white person doing it, right? So there's actually, like, to apply then your latter rule of offense, there is a need for like people not of that background to tread a bit more cautiously.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, definitely, right? Like, in the same way that, I mean, if you take Australia's version of the African American experience, we would both feel horrifyingly uncomfortable trying to put on an Indigenous accent, right? Like, yeah. And even, I think I was listening to some podcasts, and even like a white person saying a black fella, even that sounded a bit weird, right? Like, as we're getting so sensitive about it. And I think it's in direct proportion. This is something where I think the kind of oppressed narrative works, right? Like, when people have been through oppression, systemic disadvantage, and trauma, that makes the whole thing more volatile, right? And at the hands of the racial group that might be trying to tread carefully. So that's the part that I think can be tricky, right? And I think that, but for the most part, a lot of that ill intent and pure, proper, deep down racism, most of it has subsided in everyday culture, right? In these Western countries and in Australia and so on. It's there, of course it's there. But most of the overt stuff has really been relegated now to some truly out there people. So it's when that happens, right? Like you have proportionate response. You start to let in a little bit more grounds to, for comedy and some other things like that.
I want to maybe just the last little bit on accents, just to touch on sort of the notion of back to the like it being a taboo, right? So I think the rule of thumb that and actually I quite like the way you've put it, because I think it gives a bit of space for nuance and kind of judgment and reason. Whereas I think the way it's been sort of applied up to, and I'll say up to now because I think it is changing, but it's just been like a taboo. You just don't do it. There's no space for it. Don't even go there, especially if you're white. Like if you're a comedian or even if you're just in company of friends, like just don't do it. Like it's just dangerous, right? Then no good will come of it. And it's a taboo, but the problem with it being a taboo is it just becomes this like rule that you do not really understand why the rule's there. And I mean, you probably do understand why the rule's there, but like maybe you're more thinking of it from a selfish point of view of like, I'll just get like it'll be bad for me if I do it, rather than thinking why it's bad for the other person.
You're worried about that, right? You're worried about just being the consequences for yourself.
For self, yeah, that's right. Yeah. But I think it is changing now, because I think YouTube, like, I mean, maybe the litmus test for me is thinking like the Gen Alpha, right? Because I think they're quite different. I think the Gen Zs? Gen Zs are the sort of the taboo generation. They're the ones that sort of said, no, don't, this is off the table. But I think Gen Alpha, like, they find this shit funny. Like,
it's that meme culture, I think, that 4chan meme culture where they yell things. But is it that different from, people yelling out, "What's up?" Like that, when that was like, you just heard that randomly around for this short period, in the 2000s, right? And like little things like that catch on. Like memes are not new in that way, right?
Just the last thing I just want to say on Uncle Roger, right? I think it's important to come back to the notion that this is a character, right? This is a character he's playing. It's literally called Uncle Roger, right? He's playing the dude who like finds faults with everyone, with everything. Like he's playing a character. And actually, like, I think that's part of it, right? It's part of the spice of the character.
Well, like I said, there was a problem. The fact that at the beginning, a lot of people couldn't tell if he was playing a character, because there are people that speak like that 24/7. I know people. I've grown up like amongst people, because I'm Southeast Asian, that talk like that, right? And people have been desensitized some of that in like Crazy Rich Asians and Fresh Off the Boat and all these kind of, immigrant comedy cultures. This is a true accent, right? Like this.
And the other thing too that we shouldn't forget, like, okay, so I don't think there's like this massive controversy. Like, I don't think around what he's doing. Like, I think, like, I don't think he's like on the hit list to be cancelled or anything like that. Like, but to the extent that, someone might raise some questions over like, oh, is that like, how do they feel about it? Like, have to remember, like, this guy's like his biggest market from like an audience perspective. It's like Singapore and Malaysia. Like he is big in the countries he's from, like, or the region he's from. It gives
you a kick, right, to be represented. I think that even in this even in this way, it does give you a bit of a kick to hear your accent and hear your idiosyncrasies. But look, like a really good example of this, of where this can take you, right? Like in terms of audience capture for someone like, he probably hates this Nigel. What's his name? Nigel. What's his second name? Nigel. He probably hates this now because he can't shake this character. All right. The Chappelle Show was like the highest rated kind of comedy skit show, right? And famously, he had this moment where people were laughing. He filmed some of it on the live stage, his monologues and stuff, where he did a skit or something, and he just saw this sea of like white people laughing, like just uncontrollably laughing, and he had this moment of, I'm betraying my race. I'm like in the monkey suit, and it was just this weird mirror where it broke the entertainer fourth wall, and he walked away from it. He walked away from famously $50 million. He got off the bus, started walking, and this is where it can take you, where like even if you are the person making fun of your own culture, you can kind of see drawn to a conclusion that maybe that people are laughing perhaps for the wrong reasons. You know?
Well, I think the good thing about maybe the difference here is that, in fact, I suspect among his audience, I'm not sure how, like, of his, like, YouTube hits, like, what percentage of them would be from, like, the UK, America. There's probably a lot because they're just bigger countries, right? But, like, I think proportionally the countries he's, like, bigger in relative terms in Malaysia and Singapore than he would be the UK and America, right? And I think that would partially be because his humour would resonate more. It's like, yeah, this is totally what happens when white people try and copy our dishes, right? Like, that's funny to that audience, right? And and I've got like an uncle who speaks just like that, like, or it's the Uncle Roger thing. Like, I know that relates to me. Like, I'm this, like, I went to an English school like my whole life, and I learned to speak like English like very fluently, and like I'm privileged from that point of view, and like I contrast, my English with, so I think that's where it draws out. But
it goes back to that oppression, right? You can tell that the actor is not oppressed; he's empowered. He's the one making fun of people. He's young. He's not this, like, usually when you see that stereotype played out with ill intent, it's like the classic, like, Chinese restaurant cook, and he's like in a stained singlet talking like that, having a smoke. Has questionable hygiene, he's like deep frying a rat and putting it into a dim sum, like all these kind of negative connotations about Asian immigrants. But that's not, you don't get that with this, right? Like I said, he is empowered. He's the one in charge. He's making fun of people. Yeah. He's young, he's intelligent, right? Like, so I think that matters as well, right? That matters how people are portrayed, even if they're making fun of their own culture.
All right, so let's take a bit of a left turn or a right turn, or I don't know, a U-turn, I don't know, and come back to like this notion of like white food culture, right? You mentioned before around how I think there's always been just a bit of like, in fact, British cuisine's always been notoriously underwhelming, like, and I don't know it's ever held itself out to be anything more than that. Like, I think that they've kind of quietly soldiered on, but certainly like, French cuisine, like there's a big, and Italians love their food, all that sort of stuff. So, for some reason, all of the most famous TV chefs, like, or at least a lot of them, are from the UK. So, Jamie Oliver, Gordon Ramsay, Nigella Lawson, Heston, all of those, all of that crew, right?
Yeah.
And like, I'm sure they are good chefs, like, but the thing is, like, their cooking shows are generally pitched to the UK market. And even if they are good chefs themselves, they make all of these compromises in their versions of recipes that, like, to make it somewhat palatable to the domestic market, that it is quite hilarious. Now, especially watching like the Uncle Roger videos, now I totally accept that in a lot of ways, like I like it rings true to my own experience with food, right? Not only growing up, but like even attitudes to food. And I think you've spoken before, either on the podcast or even we've just chatted offline about like nothing good in cooking comes quickly. Like, you have to invest time, effort, like you have to follow steps, like everything, like details matter, all that sort of stuff, right? And then you see like Gordon Ramsay, or like 10-minute meals, like we're gonna make a we're gonna make a dish that, like, in Vietnam they spend 24 hours like making in 10 minutes, like it's just that
Jamie Oliver's 15-minute meals.
It's just so I kind of and I say this as like the dude who's going to make a pho on the weekend, right? And I've got all the bones. I'm going to make the broth. I'm going to, I've watched all the YouTube videos. So
are you respecting Vietnamese culture, or are you appropriating it?
Yes and no. So I'm going to do it like authentic. I even have, like, Uncle Roger would be very proud. I even ordered from Amazon some MSG. So I've got that in the kitchen ready to go. But I'm going to keep it authentic as I kind of understand. But there's one step that I'm going to do which is not authentic, or at least not traditional. Is I'm going to roast the bones, which for a pho usually in Vietnam they don't have. Like, they don't roast the bones. Like, they'll they just put put in the broth. But then again, like I've seen like there's some, like I've got the notion of roasting the bones from like a Vietnamese guy that runs a restaurant in Brisbane. So it's like it's not like some white guy. It's not like Jamie Oliver saying, "Hey, what you should do is like just
Sweet
go to
sauce.
get the packet rice and put that in."
Yeah, look, it's tricky. I think that it's what I said at the start, that Western cooking, right? Like elevated Michelin, highfalutin restaurants, they try to like justify their existence, or how much they charge, right? And at the heart of it, a lot of Southeast Asian food, at least, is very peasanty, is very kind of cheap and cheerful. They don't take themselves so seriously, especially for these like little dish, the staple dishes like fried rice and all these kind of things. And so that's why it's good. Like the authentic way of doing things, right, is the base, and then you can experiment from there. And the problem is when you get these Western chefs thinking that they can do their version of it that's better, right? And what I will say, that it's fun to kind of disrupt that power balance, right? Which, like, you're taking a 3-star Michelin chef and being like, you don't know what you're doing when it comes to making fried rice. Like, that's just funny. But what I would say, that there are real differences in cuisine cultures and the way that you've been brought up and your palate. And a really good example, I mean, I dub myself in for this, the Asian food that I enjoy versus, like, say, if you go to these Asian countries and you have, like, just a normal banquet, you will be really challenged. Like, I will be really challenged to eat every meal in the banquet, right? Because you think you're eating authentic food, but you're not. You're eating, like, the sanitized version of it, right? So you will get into like a lot of trouble trying to eat this food if you have a Western palate. And there will be exceptions, but en masse, I reckon you could take 9 out of 10 people from Australia, even if they're Chinese, Asian, and you pop them in and have a banquet in the kind of home countries, and there'll be dishes there that they really don't like. They find really challenging. And that's just how it is, right? Just like what, if you ever eat really authentic Indian food, right? Like none of this butter chicken palace stuff. It's really challenging. Like some of it you can't eat. And yeah, like I remember famously, I had a really good Irish friend that I worked with, and he said to me, "Roger, I thought I liked Chinese food, but I've realized that I only like Irish Chinese food." And it's not the same. It's nowhere near the same. But anyway, it's all good.
The one thing that's good about watching the Uncle Roger videos is he watches, like, let's say Jamie Oliver trying to make a I don't know, some sort of either fried rice or some other dish, and it's just the butchering of, like, it's actually co-opting like a part of like Asian cuisine, but totally misusing it or misconstruing it. So it's sort of, they take an element of it to give the veneer of it being authentic, and it's portrayed as authentic for that reason, but it's totally butchered. So the example I would give is the use of silken tofu, where he just rips it up almost like it's feta cheese or something, and
was
just
particularly heinous.
sprays it across the dish, and then talks about, oh yeah, it's like it's got this wonderful flavor. It's like, no, that's not that's not what you're supposed to do.
This is also why Westerners actually are more, like, they're more experimental than these other cultures, right? Because they don't give a fuck about rules.
But
They
that's such a
understand them.
token, like, yeah, but I think that bit's okay. But like, I think that it's the token, like, this is not an innovation that you should be recommending to people. Like this, yeah, sure, try it in your own home, but like, don't recommend. Like, he's literally tried that once before, and he's like, oh yeah,
Filming
that
it,
kind of
yeah,
seemed
yeah.
all right. Like, I'll just.
But look, man, like, you know what was really funny though? Because I remember the exchange where Uncle Roger was reviewing a video of Gordon Ramsay doing fried rice, but he was doing it like in the jungle of like Indonesia or something like that, right? And that was the one where he was rating him really highly, and then halfway through the video, Gordon Ramsay pulled out like a second wok. Uncle Roger was like, "Oh," when he was like, Gordon Ramsay is wok fuckboy." Even Chinese people only have one wok. And so it was so funny, right? But the greatest thing about that was that this is why entertainment always trumps, right? Entertainment and comedy always trumps the reality, right? It's a reality distortion, because at the end of the day, Nigel is not a chef. He's just this comedian put on a character. He doesn't know that much about cooking. Gordon Ramsay is like a genius. And like he said in response to that video, he has spent more time in Indonesia and Southeast Asia, like authentically learning this stuff than Nigel has, right? And I 100% believe that's true, right? But you come away from that video thinking that Gordon Ramsay is an idiot, and this comedian pretending to be a Chinese chef that works at like a Panda Express or something knows what he's talking about, which he doesn't, right? So I think that part is like, I find that so hilarious that actually Gordon Ramsay, who has spent time embedded in Indonesian culture, is still coming off like second best, even though he's done more than like most Chinese people in that way.
Well, I just sort of wonder, like, again, I don't think it's necessarily that Jamie Oliver and Gordon Ramsay can't follow the authentic recipe or wouldn't even do that for themselves, but that, you know, if they're 15-minute cooking segments going into, 20 million homes in the UK, you can't start talking about things like fish sauce and kaffir lime leaves or galangal root and stuff like that, because they don't have it, and even if they did have it, they wouldn't use it because the taste would be a bit weird for them, right? So they have this butchered sort of played down version of it, and then he sort of gets in on the slipstream on that, and he's got a wealth of stuff to like make fun of. But the thing is, like with Uncle Roger though, I think he does have like a good team of like food advisors behind him, because I saw this one where someone was making Italian, and he did the exact same thing with someone trying to make some. I can't remember what Italian dish was, but he did say at the end, Uncle Roger, he said, thank you, Vincenzo from Vincenzo's Plate, for your assistance in making this video. So like, who's another YouTuber, so they're all collaborating with each other now, and he gave him all the, like, he's an Italian pasta sort of dude, like advising on, how to make good pasta or whatever. And he's just given him all the lines, right? But he doesn't, to your point, he doesn't really know about Italian cuisine, right? And that's where it's kind of morphed into this sort of, yeah.
See, what could white people do to sell out their culture? Not that much.
Yeah, well,
there's no equivalent, right? Like there's not really an equivalent. I think that.
Well, this is why people not allowed to have a culture. Like even Germans or French or Italians, or like they're allowed their culture. They're allowed their kind of quite distinctive culture. But I think there's like the colonial, the notion. If you say you're proud to be British, the immediate thought is like, as in you're proud of your British heritage and culture. The immediate thought is, oh, you must be some like
soccer hooligan,
right-wing extremist, right? Like, just back to the food thing, right? What's your take on? As I said, I'm going to try and make pho on the weekend, and it does seem like such a white thing to do, to like want to try and.
You're going on this pilgrimage to try to like recreate.
But okay, I actually have a couple
of national dish.
So the experience, like the experience for me, there's a couple of angles to it. One is like, I remember living abroad, right, and always thinking like, both in Europe and in Asia, that's where I've lived in, thinking, I wish we had like an Australian supermarket. Like Australian supermarkets are great. Like they've got everything. Of course, they've got everything that I'm used to eating, right? But it's only when you try and make some of these dishes that you realize just how shit they are, like just how they don't have everything.
Yeah. And
you end up having to go to like 5 different shops just to get like the things you need. So like, you can get some things from Coles, like some basic spices or whatever. And especially if you throw Aldi in the mix, like you want to get as much as you can from Aldi, then you can't get it from Aldi, so you go to Woolworths or Coles, then you can't get it from Woolworths or Coles, then you got to go to Harris Farm, and then you can't get what you need from Harris Farm, so you got to go to a special meat butcher place, then you can't get, then there's certain things you need to go to the Asian grocer for, and then that Asian grocer for whatever reason sold out, so you need to go to a different Asian grocer. It turns out you need to go to the special one in Haymarket.
My parents always tell me the story about when they first came to Sydney, how impossible it was to find any like Asian ingredients. Like you just couldn't find. There's like one store in Chinatown that you had to like trek into to get, and now you can go into Woolworths and Coles, and there's a whole aisle if you're lucky. Sometimes in Cuisine, yes, they jam a few cultures in there quite disrespectfully. Sometimes I like to look at those international food aisles, and I'm like, these countries. Like you're putting opposing countries right next to each other. You know, you got the Koreans and the Japanese right there, and but we've come a long way, is all I'm saying, right? Like I think that you, as an enthusiast, trying to recreate a complicated dish like pho, and trust me, I grew up pronouncing it pho for the longest time, and that was like totally like everyone in my relatives, Asian relatives, called it pho because people forget, you know, Vietnamese culture is very different from Malaysian and yeah, Cantonese culture. But that's a good thing, and it's a thing that certain Chinese minorities would never do. And that's what I mean about white people being so adventurous and so like that's a good thing, even if you fuck it up, even if you look dorky trying to do it and you're like trying to buy like a wok that you use 2 times a year or whatever it is, right? Like I'm all for that. That's the best parts about Western culture, that they're so willing to experiment and to combine, because Asian people aren't diverse. They're not willing to like my dad has a heart attack every time we go to Japanese or something, or like he only just started eating Thai food. You know, like I think that it's, and that's why when you see people like a Neil Perry's a great example, or David Thompson, who has just fallen in love with Asian food, or in Thompson's kind of stuff, he's fallen in love with Thai food, right? And these white guys cook Asian food better than most Asians, right? But they're white, you know, like they're the Eminem of rappers, right? And I think that that's okay. Like I love that. Like I really, I don't think you should ever feel like that. I would be upset if that was looked down upon in some weird way, right? Like I think that that's the best thing, because those cultures that you're cooking, like the Vietnamese people aren't trying to learn the authentic way to cook pasta, right? They're not interested in that. They're not doing that, right? You know, and it's kind of like bagging someone out who's bilingual, saying, "Oh, how bad's your English?" It's like, "Well, how good's your Spanish?" Right? Like, I think that I kind of think of it that way.
Well, the funny thing was in the Asian supermarket in Haymarket, there was like I mean, it was predominantly Asian people trying to get Asian things that they can't get anywhere else. But like every now and then you'd see like this lone white dude trying to get like get some special ingredient, and I was one of those.
See, now there are sleepers though, right? Because like you know how you see those videos every now and then on YouTube where it'll be some white guy that looks like you, right? And then they'll be like trawling around like a Japanese or a Korean supermarket, and then they'll just drop fluent Korean or Japanese. And the people, like, the Koreans or Japanese will literally just, like, die of shock. Their, like, jaws will open, like, their pants will burn off because they just can't believe this white guy can speak their language so well. But that's becoming more common, right? Like, oh, yeah, just like the first time a Chinese person heard Kevin Rudd bust out one of his lines, man, those panties dropped faster than you could, like, they're just like, what the fuck? This is our guy? He does not look like our guy, but he is. It doesn't take much, right? It doesn't take much. Like, people love it. People love it when you make an effort. Except the French, they hate it.
Well, the only thing that I don't love is is Jamie Oliver trying to make a pad thai paste by grinding up silken tofu in his...
But even Jamie... come on. I love Jamie Oliver. And I think I love him because he is passionate about food, right? Mainly Italian. Like his wheelhouse is Italian and Mediterranean food, but he loves it and he does respect it. Yeah.
I think he puts himself out there because he tries to, as he puts it, he evolves dishes, right? I'm going to evolve it. Actually, the one thing we haven't talked about today with white people, and I noticed this the other day when I went to a bookstore and went to the cookbook section.
How'd you find a bookstore?
No, they still exist.
Only in the West where like no one actually.
No, this was Western Sydney, baby. But the
borders.
No, they don't have borders.
That'd be my border policy.
The no, the cookbook section, and this is definitely like a white people thing, and this is something Uncle Roger has pointed out, is there's a lot of like, there's a lot of cookbooks around, like, how to make like good pasta, or like how, Italian cuisine, French cuisine, like, cuisine based kind of cookbooks. But like for every Italian cookbook there's like 3 like vegan cooking, or cooking on a diet, or
keto,
low fat, CSIRO diet, like
so true. They just suck all the love out of it.
And just that whole thing of like one of Uncle Roger's quips of the day being in one of his episodes being this white people favorite topic, like talking about like what food they will not eat. There, I did the accent. What food they're not eating this week? Like, well, what ingredient they have to restrict or not use the proper amount of, because they're watching some artificial, they've imposed some artificial restriction on their cuisine, and I love that approach to cooking where you just I'm just gonna, like, if it's unhealthy, I just won't eat as much of the final product, but I'm going to get the final product like what it should be.
There are definitely pros and cons with that. Like, I grew up in a family who had zero appreciation of nutrition, or they're very warped view of nutrition, right? It's like taste over nutrition. And there are pros and cons to it, right? Like, sometimes you Westerners eating your meat and 3 veg every night, like, what you don't realize is that you're actually training for the Olympics. You just don't know it. Because you're always eating such like good food, right? In the most, the best example of that, it might be bland, but it's actually very healthy for you, and that kind of has a cumulative effect on your health, for sure. So, it's swings and roundabouts, and I think food culture is like a really interesting piece. I think that wherever you go, you don't ever have as much variety as you do in Western countries, right? And that's okay. But like, for example, we've talked about Italy, right? You only get Italian food. And yes, it's like the best example of Italian food, but you only get Italian food, right? Like, and it's great on a holiday, but what happens when you want something else?
Well, who needs something else when you've got good Italian food?
I'm serious though. Like, you're in Florence and you want sushi. You're not getting sushi.
Don't bother.
You're not getting sushi.
No, I feel a little bit the same when I lived in China. You have like, you talk about different cuisines, and then you hear, oh no, we have all the cuisines. We have north, south, east, and west.
Well, I do have KFC, right?
KFC, yeah. KFC is pretty big there.
You got the Colonel.
Yeah. All right. Well, yeah. Well, we'll leave it there to Uncle Roger, I guess.